Hi, this is Lowell again with explaining the number system and how to work with bands. Teaching this. This is the third video. And the first video we talked about intervals, understanding your intervals. And the second video we talked about understanding how the scales are formed, the difference between a diatonic and a chromatic scale. And so in the number system, we use the diatonic scale, which dia meaning day, diatonic. Days of the week, there's 7 days of the week, and there's 7 notes in the diatonic scale. And so you build triads on top of each one of those numbers of the scale. And so getting back to the concept of intervals, it's like, well, why do I need to know intervals? Basically what I'm teaching is not just theory, it's also ear training. And so it's how you perceive the distance between one note of the scale and the other note of the scale. And so with the number system, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be skipping back and forth between different numbers of that scale. And the first thing that you need to do in terms of understanding what you're hearing is understand what key you're in. And so I'm using the key of C just for simplicity and explaining the concepts, but everything I'm showing you can be done for all 12 keys. But I'm going to review just a little bit. So we're going to talk about intervals again. And in the first video, we explained all the different 12 relationships of intervals, and that is half step, which is also called a minor second, minor third, major third, perfect fourth, augmented fourth, diminished fifth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, minor seventh, major seventh, perfect octave. And then we talked about in the second video the difference between the chromatic scale, which is this, all 12 notes, versus the diatonic scale, which is just the 7. And then we talked about how the major scale has whole steps or major seconds everywhere except for 2 places, and that is between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. So here's whole step, half step. This is between 3 and 4, then whole step, half step. And then when you form triads on top of each one of these, and triad meaning 3, in other words, 3-note chords, using the scale, then as you go up and down that scale, the relationships of what kind of chords are formed based upon the fact that you have half steps in those 2 places cause the chords to be different. And so we end up having, for number 1 in the scale, 1 is major, 2 is minor, 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished, and then we're back to 1. And for all practical purposes, 7 is not really useful because it's a diminished chord. And so most people understand pop music and church music, which is fairly simplistic, as basically using 6 chords instead of 7. And so what you end up having is you end up having 3 major chords and 3 minor chords. So the major chords are 1, 4, and 5, and then the minor chords are 2, 3, and 6. So in order to hear and train your ear to understand while we skip around from chord to chord, you're going to want to hear the root of that chord. All right, so the root of that chord is this. Right, and so that's the most simplistic understanding of that particular triad. And I'm going to get into transpositions and inversions here in a minute, but essentially what you want to hear is, that note, even though there's 2 other notes that are happening, your ear wants to hear that root note, and that cues you into, okay, that's the 1 chord. And then when you start hearing progressions, you're going to want to hear the interval, and that's why I'm going back to understanding your intervals. You're going to want to hear the interval. If I do this particular chord progression, let's say I'm going to go 1, 4, 5, 1, which is the most common. 1, 4, 5, 1. Okay, and so what your ear wants to hear is that, or what you should hear, zeroing in, when I say your ear, your mind of listening is zeroing in on that root. And so what you're really hearing is you're hearing this 1, 4, 5, 1. And so when you think of intervals, you're going to count up the major scale. And so you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Your mind is going to jump basically up to the 4, not jump, but you're going to think in between the steps of that scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then from 4 to 5, 4, 5. That's a whole step. So if you understand your intervals and what you're hearing, then when you hear this, you're going to hear fourth. Okay, so from 1 to 4, you'll understand that interval. And then if you're on this and you go to a 2 chord down to here, right? So you're on a 2 chord, and then you're going to hear that root note of those chords doing this 4 to 2. And you're going to hear that, okay, well, that's a minor third. You're walking down this major scale. You're thinking 4, 3, 2, right? And then let's say we go from there to this chord, right? And so you're hearing basically the root of that chord. You're going here to here. And so your ear is hearing a fifth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so from 2 to 6, you're hearing that. All right. So there's the interval, understanding how to hear and listen for intervals is part of it. The other part that kind of clues you in is listening to whether it's major or minor. Okay. And whether we are born with this or whether it's for something that we've learned, we tend to think of major as happy sounding and minor as sad sounding. So you have to ask yourself, okay, is this a major chord or is this a minor chord? Right? Sad, happy. So if it's a minor chord, you have basically three options. You have 2, 3, and 6. If it's a major chord, then you have 1, 4, or 5. And so whenever you're listening, I'm talking about listening skills, using intervals and also analysis of whether things are major or minor, that kind of clues you into, okay, what number of the scale am I on? So I said a minute ago I was going to talk about inversions. What can be a little bit interesting when you're trying to hear what chord you're on. I said here's 1, and then you have this chord that's stacked on top of that. Then what can make that a little bit difficult to hear sometimes is when you have various inversions of that same chord. So let's say that instead of the chord being in its most compact root position, is what it's called, then we end up putting the root on top, which sounds like this. Okay, so that's first inversion. And so let's say that we put the third on top, and so that sounds like this. So it's all the C chord, it's all the 1 chord, but there's different inversions of it. So 1, 3, or root position, first inversion, second inversion, and then back to root position. So each one of these chords can sound like that. It has basically 3 different ways you can play the chord, but it's still the same 1 chord. Another way that you might experience that is what note is playing the bass. Like, here's root position, and then if I just change the bass note to the E of the C chord, right, or the G of the C chord. So essentially you're doing the same thing, as you're putting the chord in different inversions. But don't let that trick your ear. You can still hear what one is if you will just sing the major scale to yourself. If in your mind you'll keep the major scale preeminent going around in your imagination. So da 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Seven's hardly used. So what we do is we use the circle of fifths, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next video in terms of what a chord progression does, and I already alluded to it a little bit in one of the previous videos, but I'll explain it a little bit more in depth about what a good chord progression normally does and the way it wraps around. It's not just sequential like 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a pattern to it. So anyway, just to summarize this video, I wanted to make sure that you understood how to start listening for intervals, whether it be a fourth or a fifth, as you skip around from chord to chord. And I also wanted you to understand not to be fooled by transpositions, or rather by inversions. It's still the C chord, or this is still the D minor chord, number 2. Right, or the E chord, the number 3 minor, right? So your ear still hears that that's 3. So a lot of this is just theory, but it's also ear training. It's understanding how to listen. So what I would encourage you to do is just, turn on your favorite songs that you like on the radio or the YouTube, things that are popular. Most songs are pretty simplistic in pop culture these days, and so you can pretty well determine what is the progression, what is the chord progression that's happening just by listening to it. Just ask yourself, okay, number 1, what key is this? Try to identify, sing to yourself a major scale, and then where is 1, and then as the song progresses, just, okay, is that a 4 chord, is that a 3 chord, is that and just challenge yourself to try to identify what is it that I'm hearing based upon that major scale. Again, keeping that scale always playing in the background in your mind. So ba da 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 da, and you can tell that it's a major scale by putting those half steps in the right places, 3 and 4, 7 and 8.